Is it true that 1 Corinthians 13:10 teaches that when the New Testament canon is closed, the gifts of the Spirit will no longer be normative? No, 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 no. That is a terribly misused verse. Can I tell you something? If you look at the history of interpretation, look at what church leaders said about that verse through the centuries, look at it through major interpreters through the centuries, you'll find that is a relatively recent notion and one that is absolutely, completely untenable scripturally and historically. So what does Paul write? 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 10, Paul says this, but when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. Now, he has just said that you have love and you have tongues, you have prophecy, you have knowledge, but when the perfect comes, the partial shall pass away. So the day will come when Paul says you won't have tongues, you won't have prophecy, you won't have knowledge, meaning imperfect knowledge. Now we see as through a veil, but then face to face. Now we know in part, then we'll know even as we are known. What's it talking about? Well, obviously the return of Jesus. It's self-evident. And the next chapter, Paul encourages prophecy, and he says not to forbid tongues. And the whole of the New Testament presupposes the ongoing gifts of the Spirit. And early church history documents prophecy and healing and deliverance and miracles for centuries after that. No, this idea that Paul was speaking about something that wasn't even in his mind, namely that there's going to be another canon of Scripture called the New Testament, and I'm currently writing a book in the New Testament. When the canon of the New Testament closes, no. The thought didn't exist in his brain as he's writing this letter to the Corinthians. But interpreting 1 Corinthians 13:10 in the way that some do did not exist in the minds of interpreters for centuries and centuries and centuries. It is an extreme minority interpretation held to by a fringe of people, and even these days, among those who don't believe the gifts and power of the Spirit are normative for today, there are less and less and less of them who interpret 1 Corinthians 13:10 in that way. Look, someone wanted to debate me over that and said, well, when the perfect happened, when the temple was destroyed in the year 70, and that proves that the fact that we were going to debate the issue means that we don't have perfect knowledge. The fact that we're still having debates over the scriptures means we don't have perfect knowledge. And yet, Paul writes that when the perfect comes, the partial will disappear. The partial will disappear. Yeah, has that happened yet? Do we know God the way he knows us? Do we see face to face in this world? No. When he returns, we will. Yes. Scriptures are clear. 1 Corinthians 13:10 has been terribly abused and misused.